Hi there. Thanks for downloading, listening to, and watching the Lean Into Artcast, a show where a couple of visual storytellers get together, take on various topics that pop up when you start to think about navigating a life, communicating visually. We think hard about this stuff, so you will too. My name is Jerzy Drozd. I'm a cartoonist and teaching artist. The other host is...
Hey, hi, Jerzy. I'm Rob Stenzinger, a user experience and game designer. How goes things?
Okay. We're recording this. We're actually broadcasting this on a Monday, which is not what we say at the bottom of every episode for people who have shown up in the past.
That's not what the those stone tablets we unearthed and whatever beams of radiation that affected us were like, yep, Thursday every time. Let's podcast every Thursday forever.
Yes. What, is it a promise or a condemnation? I don't know. But yeah, as it happens last week on Thursday. No, what was it? It was Wednesday night. No, it was Thursday afternoon.
Oh my gosh! I'm like, I hope the problem didn't go on that long.
No, it was only 24 hours. But Thursday afternoon last week, we had a big storm come through southeast Michigan, and it knocked out the power at my house. And I was without power until Friday evening. So, but in the estimate of like when the power would be restored kept changing. Like in the afternoon, when I think I texted you at like 4 p.m., I'm like, well, they say it's supposed to be back up this evening. And then like 9 o'clock rolls around. It's like, no, it still hasn't come back. And so we had to postpone it until the following Monday. Sorry, everybody. But Mother Nature's the toughest kid on the block, and there's not much we could do about that.
Right on. But sometimes the schedule changes, and we try to share it, and we did. And but yeah, we're resilient. We're back. Here we are. Yeah.
So, what are we talking about this week, Rob?
Well, I think it's absolutely wonderful that we go through times where we get, I think, more questions than typical from our listeners, and that we've gone through sort of this streak of getting a bunch of them. Really fun, right? So sometimes folks will post to the community thing on Patreon. Sometimes they'll post as a reaction to an episode, and sometimes we get emails and whatnot, right? And honestly, we got another really interesting sort of bundle of questions, a scenario shared to us by Mushin Girl again, right? And this one is all about like you titled this like Project Triage, and sort of I think it's about navigating the tensions between the different. I mean, it's a little bit the day-to-day things you need to do, and then the things you also want to do because you believe in it and you're excited about it, all those passion projects. Then and then which one and stuff, right? But do you want to take a running attempt at like a filtered version of reading Mushin Girl's message?
Sure. Yeah. So the big idea here is I feel like it's a familiar story to a lot of us. Let's hit the transition music first. How about that? And then we'll dive into it.
Yeah.
All right. So here we go. Boom.
Wow. All right. I'm ready. You ready? I'm ready.
We actually got a comment about that recently, that when like that music plays, people check the YouTube video to see if you're dancing. and I said that's a new service that the podcast provides. It's now comes like extra Rob dancing.
Uptime meter kind of thing. You just like there's a website, isrobdancing.com for your convenience.
It's robdancing.com. Somebody go get that. Okay, so what's the big idea here? So I think that this is a common experience, common enough that it feels like it's relatable to me now as somebody who is a quote-unquote working professional, but also when I was first starting out, this idea that there's only so many hours in the day, and it turns out that being biological creatures, we have to do a lot of different things in order to maintain our biologicalness, and especially if we have other people in our lives, right? We have to make money and we have to make food. We have to maintain our homes. We maybe have vehicles. We have all these different responsibilities that come up with being an adult, and all these different responsibilities and different concerns, and want to make sure that I clarify that these are like wonderful problems to have if you have people that to care for in your life, and you have animals, children, people to love and look after. Um, that's time you're not going to have to make the work that you're crazy about. And um, whenever I am in a situation where I'm not able to work on my stuff, is when I seem to have like lots and lots of ideas to work on things. And these ideas, because you have so little time, they accumulate. You look over your shoulder, you have this gigantic bag of ideas that you would love to, that all are equally compelling and interesting and have tons and tons of potential. Um, and they're all there to remind you, you will never have enough time to work on all of us. So the question that Mushin Girl put to us was like, uh, what do you do if you have too many ideas if you have more ideas in projects than you have time? How do you manage? And I love this phrase that she came up with is how do you manage task saturation and give each project the attention it deserves?
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, we were having a text conversation about that message from her. I said, yeah, that's like Project Triage, right? It's like, how do you how do you keep them from dying on the battlefield, right? How do you patch them up just enough to keep them going?
Yeah, right. I guess that's a pretty severe metaphor, isn't it? So my poor wounded projects, all strewn about, and which wounds on which projects do I attend to first to maximize the good? Boy, yeah. And I'd like this aspect of Mushin Girl's question as well, where it's like, let's see, have you two ever been in a position where you've had too many ideas, projects you wanted to work on, but were uncompromising about giving any of them up? Which I think that hints at something interesting too. Yeah. Ooh. So I like what you wrote in our show notes. Can we take a moment to sit with the awkwardness of never having enough time? Is that and is that the like kind of a personal narrative kind of thing? Because I know I feel this too, where it's like I remember going through different life stages of I guess busy always has looked different to me, right? And it probably is still changing, and I'm sort of barely catching up to what it actually is right now for this life stage, and stuff keeps moving. Where I remember being a teenager and feeling busy. I remember being in my 20s and feeling busy. I remember being in my 30s and feeling busy, and like it really meant a lot of different things at these different times. And now it's like being busy. It's a very different version of and that feeling is definitely like, well, time is a scarcity. Your attention has a scarcity to it. And then there's a relationship with the those projects, and like how uncompromising, like how are you attached or detached or whatever, how do you relate to the projects? And that's a big bundle of stuff to unravel just with that. So I think with your question, can we take a moment to sit with the awkwardness of never having enough time? And I would amend that to say, and at least never feeling like you have enough time, right?
Right.
And it's a thing. I don't have a great answer for this, other than I don't
want us to
know if I really and this isn't a great answer, but like I have become more comfortable with just saying, I know I'm an ambitious, quirky fool that will keep wanting to do stuff like this. And hopefully I've, like we can talk about like tools and for other perspectives and stuff where it's like, if I use enough of the tools that I have, I'll be able to observe some output. And if I'm patient and I do that, I'll have some peace. Right. But like, I know like there's just this accumulating list of desires that they don't call it desire for nothing. You want that really bad. I want to work on these things. I want to, but like, what's your relationship with that want? I think is an interesting thing to explore, and separate from the idea of like, well, what is, how scarce is your time and attention and all that. So, and is that awkward? I think there's lots of awkward. Even this description of it, it's super awkward. But it
and
especially like if you feel like better after a while, you're like, well, I know I got to schedule things to make the most of my time and meet my commitments and roles and get some amount of capacity available to it to, tackle these other things they're optional that I want to do. And, it's awkward that I don't feel awesome at that.
Yeah. And it's how do I put it? I feel like, okay, if I can get philosophical just for a second about it, I feel like it's that awkwardness and that tension and that desire is like, that's what keeps you coming back to it, right? Because if it was simply goal oriented, like I want to make a thing, well, I've made lots of things, and once you've made a few things, if that itch ever gets scratched, there's no reason to come back to it. So I feel like that unsatisfied desire is part of what makes the game interesting. And I feel like there's a difference between not being good at it and constantly being challenged by it. Do you see the distinction I'm making?
So you can be skillful, but the difficulty may not ever change.
Well, I mean that the difficulty
or it could get more difficult.
Right. The difficulty can ramp up or it could change its character. And so
greater skill and capacity means you might be taking on more, which means you're still navigating the same boundary, the same tensions.
I was talking with my friend Dan Mishkin. We were at a comic convention this past weekend, and I was telling him about this thing I took on recently that I'm not naming just because it's not interesting to go into in great detail. But Dan turned to me, he's like, "Why did you do that?" I said, "I think because I think responsibility is really, really attractive." And it's almost like a sickness, but yeah, it's like with over time, you just find out that you accumulate more and more and more, and that can become part of that tension as well.
Yeah.
So
you.
I didn't want to come up with like any kind of pat answer to that. It's just I think it's worth acknowledging that this is something that I feel like, and this is not to diminish it. This is more to embrace it and say that this is something that I think is like central to just being a creative person. Is that tension and that unfulfilled desire is like part of the complexion of the experience of doing the thing, right? Now there's ways to engage with it, and I think there's ways to think about one's relationship with it, to use your language. So I think that's where we can move on to talk about managing task saturation. What do you think?
Okay, I like it. So that sounds useful. Managing my task saturation. Is it? Does that help me? How does that help? Am I seeing the tasks in more beautiful, vibrant, threatening color?
All you got to do is make a Trello board and just color code everything, and it's all taken care of. No, we've talked a lot about task management on the show. I feel like
True.
I feel like we've handled that topic in a lot of different ways. So I wonder if there's a different way to go at it a little bit. How do we engage with the narrative aspect of task saturation, right? When we're saying the words "I'm too busy," right? And any what do you do, Rob, when you're thinking about, like, when you hear the words in your head, "I'm too busy lately. I've got too much on my plate."
Well, that means it's I don't know. Again, I think this has been a present for a long. I've coexisted with this for some time, so I'm. So when I find myself doing this, again, like it's we've mentioned, well, emotions are signals, and so like this is if I'm getting observant about what I'm thinking and feeling, I have a chance to not feel like I'm escalating in a stressful manner about it. So that's something I try to notice. So I can try to like change how I'm relating to this list of things. Like first of all, knowing what is it that's bugging me, and then how can I, like honestly, like on a week to week basis to get so more specific since we're on the ground. I mean, it could be thinking of like, okay, so like let's pick last November. How about?
Okay.
So November we have our creative challenge, our art sound off that we put into the world, and our cheerleaders and try to be ringleaders for that community. And so there's commitments to try to be present and connected and caring to that group of people who choose to participate, which is an honor with this thing that we put in the world. And then there's also being a participant with it. And then there's family, day job, etc. And then there's also the other regular side projects. So so that having that being in a situation where I think to myself, what have I done, and this is frustrating. It's not alien, it's way too familiar. But as a side effect of that, it's like if I try to acknowledge that if I can't get more skillful at it, I really need to make some lifestyle change, where being skillful, it's like what that how I relate to it really that has to change, or like the things I'm committing to has to change, or both, right? And there's always like a set of tensions, and so the things I try to use primarily are the skillful, emotional, thought, kindness tools, with which acknowledging my quirkiness and all that stuff. And then there's the layers of other tools, as far as, well, okay, how do I name and manage these things, and then put the right ones in my attention, and the other ones I need to file away. And know that this whole thing that I'm working on, this, like, how do I manage my project tasks, commitments, and time and attention, it's if I'm going to get better at it, I need to be observant about it and do some journaling and stuff like that.
Oh man, so now you're adding another thing to the list when you're already too busy, right?
It's the worst.
Yeah. Well, but I'm going to use some of Kate's language again. Your wife, Kate Stenzinger, who has been a guest on the show many times, who has uttered some of the wisest things, or wisest questions, wisest interrogatives I've ever heard on the show. Is like a purposeful pause, right? And you talked about like de-escalating or not escalating, right? Like taking a moment to like, because like I feel like that's when things get out of control, is when I start ruminating on, I'm feeling stressed. Why am I feeling stressed? Now I'm angry at myself for feeling stressed. Well, I'm feeling stressed because of all these things that are never going to happen, because I don't work hard enough on this stuff, and there's too much, right? Like you can
yeah, ramping
get
up.
that snowball growing and growing and growing, and like building speed. But that stepping back and reminding yourself of some perspective. I think about like what does it look like when we're discouraged, when we have like when we hear the words, I'm too busy, I've got too much going on. Sometimes when I feel discouraged, it's that I'm never going to get to this thing that I think is a pretty good idea, that feels very timely, and it feels like if I got this thing out there, the market's right, that it might grab onto this. There's a chance it could, right? And then I think about perspective, like when I step back and when that frustration happens, and I'm like, well, let's think about some things, Jerzy. You've done some things that people have said were before their time, which is another way of saying that they failed. So there's also like, there's thinking about the time may feel right, but if I don't find the time to work on this thing, whether it might be that I've overcommitted myself, it might be that I have too many other pressing concerns, it might be that the idea is not ripe yet too, right? And shipping something because I'm worried about striking while the market is right, or while the tone of the conversation happening and publishing is just so, rushing to get that through the door, um, isn't necessarily that there's no guaranteed return on that, right? And there is such a thing as like being before your time too. So like there's projects that I've had that I've been very eager to get to, and I feel like, oh, that's such a great idea. There's so much potential there, and the way the discussions that I'm seeing happening in the publishing industry right now suggest that this is the time to do this thing. Maybe, also maybe not. I might be detecting something that hasn't fully ripened yet, both in terms of like what's happening in publishing and in terms of the project itself, right? Um, I have no way of knowing that for sure, and that can sort of de-escalate that frustration and tension in my
head. That's so interesting. Timing is a quirky thing, and so you can totally, like what I'm hearing, you can have this urgent fire in your belly about like how you feel about getting your product into the market. But then is that just an assumption? Or even if it's an informed, like, well, I've been in this industry and I really see these different, you're making a forecast, you're making a prediction. Maybe it's accurate, maybe it's only kind of accurate, or maybe it's totally wild, but you still feel how you feel about it. That's really interesting that I hadn't considered that angle. It's like, and almost like that's a tool to sort of be open up more patience, increase capacity for having a less urgent feeling about that.
Yeah, it's reminding myself that that's an element that I don't have a lot of control over, right? I can have a lot of research, and I can have a lot of knowledge, I can have a lot of like fairly well-informed and experienced predictions to make, but they're still predictions. And I shouldn't let that drive the car as far as like what I work on next. There's all the idea of doing what's in front of you, right? To be like a little bit more zen about it.
So I've noticed a habit that I've been, let's say, or a thing that I'm trying to turn into a habit, or I guess it is an unnoticed habit. I guess habits are habits. They're just what you're doing, whether you notice it or not. And I guess I'm noticing in, I guess, the last, I don't know, let's say 18 months or so, that I had been sort of misusing my task tracking app. And part of it was through well, how it looks is I think of a task, I think of a thing, could be a project, could be a thing to do about a specific project, right? And continue to tend that and garden that as as time goes on, recategorize things and what have you. But over time, this thing, if I would not be probably, I think it's unrealistic to think that the thing that I grew, that garden got it turned into a crazy jungle. And it was like, there's a portion of that jungle I lived in and could get things done. But like my tasks and projects were unreasonable, right? And like, but I continue to do that in recent times. But then this is, let's see. I'm trying to notice and turn that habit into, well, it's something I do naturally. So, but what if there's what if I have my goals, I have my capacity, and I have my commitments? And so all goals aren't necessarily commitments. Some goals may be I guess a not fully formed, it's almost like a goal candidate. Right. So I want to let myself do that kind of thinking, because sometimes I like what comes out of there. It's just where things got sort of less manageable and frustrating, where I would be mismanaging my own expectations, is if I really committed to those, or I felt like I had committed to those things there really weren't goals that I set myself up to succeed with yet, right? A subset are fine, but then there's always this like interesting, fascinating, desirable other goals that I'm like, well, I wish that were part of my regular capacity. But anyway, what I realize is that stuff is not really a task, and it's not really a committed to goal yet. That is me conflating knowledge management with time and attention management. So knowledge management, it's like it's a weird kind of journaling in a way. I'm journaling. I care about this. I'm journaling. I don't want to forget, and I want to someday manage a thing related to this. But it was flowing into where I manage my tasks, and so then it would crowd out regular tasks or whatever, or just it was doable. But to find out like what am I, what are my most important things to work on or whatnot. But like definitely an effort to ignore a bunch of other things that would just crowd out the place. I don't know.
So could you give me like a specific example of a goal that isn't necessarily a task, doesn't have a task attached to it?
Oh, new projects, like that's so, and even ones that are maybe there's different stages of like almost having a maturing relationship with the commitment, right? So some goals I can feel super strong about them, and like a project, a potential, like for instance, the 2 Pizza Team game, right? I put in some time in that in like December and January, and then not a lot of time since then, right? And immense desire to do it, but really, as far as the other things I committed to throughout the year and whatnot, and also the nature of that tasks and some of the barriers I have as far as getting it accomplished. Well, the mega, well, not really a task, the project of making that game. I think it was more, let's see, the project was not make that game. The project was investigate making that game. And I think I accomplished a good bit of that pre-work project. But yeah, so and pick any other let's see, things like well, okay, a thing that we've been working on for
a long time,
for a long time now. I can't even remember, but it's like a little offshoot project that relates to our work at Lenience Art. But you and I, we've been, chipping away, shelving, unshelving, back and forth for a while. I care a lot about that project that, doesn't make sense to name yet.
Yeah. And we believe in it, right? Like it's not a matter of I look at it and go like, oh, I don't know if it's ripe yet. I mean, it's ripe. We're in the stages where it's like we just got to finish pruning it and it's ready to go, right? But like finding that time and that attention for it is challenging.
It is, and so I don't know if it's realistic. Well, I think so. Sometimes I pile things on that goal list that I haven't necessarily done enough with it to maybe even give it the right context, right? So like for instance, the 2 Pizza Team game research, that's a realistic project that I was able to make a dent on. But to just throw it under the big umbrella of here's that game I want to make.
Well, I like that distinction that you drew, is that there's like is the task something where it's like let's make a thing versus let's investigate making a thing. And I feel like a lot of my projects fall into those like vaguely speaking in those two buckets, where there's projects where it's like, okay, we're in shipping mode on this and I can be in shipping mode on this. And there's ones where it's like I'm still investigating this one, and that investigation can happen in little tiny chunks here and there. Like I think about the project I'm working on right now with Dan Michigan. We started that in 2013. It's 5 years ago now. And we actually had I think like a 12-page pitch that we had put together back in 2013. Very different visual style. I was playing around with like a completely different look for my art back then. And coming back to it now, I looked at like the old pitch pages and like, they were serviceable, competent pages, but I wasn't interested in that style anymore. And what was more is like when I started doing new sketches of the characters for this project, I was like, this new style I feel like is doing the book much more justice and more service than what I was trying to do before. I was trying to sort of wedge a thing that I was visually interested in onto a project that wasn't asking for that. And maybe this is me all rationalizing after the fact, but we'll find out when the project ships, like how other people feel about it. But that's one of those things where it's like, okay, in 2013, I was still investigating the idea. I didn't really have a real grasp on it. I feel like I have more of a grasp on it now. And same thing with this little Baron von Bear thing I've been playing with for years. Years now I've been playing with this thing back and forth. And whenever I hit like a question mark, like, I don't know what to do about that, because I was still in investigation mode, I could set it down with like, with a clear heart. And because I had other things that needed my immediate attention. So it's like, I feel like those projects that are in that stage, I can treat them like creative breaks. These are things that I could just do in my sketchbook for the pure pleasure of it. And it's not, while there's an urgency in that, like, boy, I really would like to do this Baron von Bear thing. Like last year, during Inktober, I was sketching him a lot. Oh, and Sketchbook Summer. I was sketching him a lot. And I remember talking with a couple friends about it. They're like, so is that the next thing you're going to do? I'm like, boy, I wish I could. I got too many other things to do in the meantime. So here I am a year later, and I'm still just playing with it in these kind of like these creative breaks, rather than moving forward with it, which I could get frustrated about, or I could just, remind myself that I'm still investigating this, and it'll click when it clicks, and I'll be able to move forward with it hopefully fairly quickly once it clicks.
That's interesting. So what is that that click? I think there's a lot to potentially unbox in that idea of something is comfortably playful and maybe exciting, and it's one of those things like you could sit there after doing a warm up and fantasize about like that project. I can see it happening. I can see good things coming from it, but there's something about it where that excitement can exist, but it's also a little bit of distance and peace with it, where it's like, okay, and I'm going to put it down because this is my main commitment right now. And then somehow shifting gears, that's harmonious, no big deal, in the right situation where you've got that framing. And then, okay, what changes? What's that click? It's going from like, okay, investigation meter full. Now,
Yeah.
new stage.
If I were to try to describe it verbally, man, it's when I feel like I have something to say through it. Right? There's a difference between an idea that's cute, fun, interesting, exciting, and something where it's like, and I have a point, right? Boulder and Fleet started out as this fun little experiment and I've described it 100 times. It was just a mini comic I put together in a week, whole cloth. I had a blank sheet of paper, and by the end of day 7, I had an 8-page mini comic, right? And it was just an experiment just to see what I could do creatively under pressure. And if you look at that comic, the idea isn't fully formed yet. It's the start of it, and it became fully formed the moment I realized that and I can explore my thoughts on pacifism through this, right? That's when it clicked. But so I'm waiting. I'm also kind of waiting for the Baron von Bear thing to say, like, and you can say this through it. You have a point to make with this. Not that I'm trying to teach anybody, but I guess another way of putting it is like I'm still waiting for the aboutness to show up. Right? I've got a premise. I've got a situation. I've got characters. The aboutness hasn't revealed itself to me yet, and the aboutness will reveal itself through like interrogation. If I like set aside like a couple weeks to think about nothing but that, I'm sure I'd find it. But because I have other commitments, I can let it be this like casual, flirty thing that I'm doing with it.
And is that the difference between you mentioned wedging or forcing something into be, like trying to make it be ready. Like, is there another?
Yeah.
So like aboutness, it almost like the project has a mission at that point. That's what
Yeah.
I'm hearing, right?
Yeah. It has a purpose. It has a reason, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a moral or a agenda, but when an idea like with rockets, when we were pitching that book, we did multiple pitches, and the one that we knew was the right one had something to say that was like it had a clear hook in that it was animals who are associated with rocket history, but it's like, oh, and we can explore ideas about our problematic relationship with animals through this book, right? Like it had like multiple aboutnesses that were very appealing to us, whereas the other ones were just like the other pitches we did were very just like serviceable ideas that I'm sure we would have found some aboutness in, but it wasn't immediately apparent.
So there's like the other elements you mentioned as far as when like having a premise and characters. It's like those are like elements of like a vision or some content and how you tend to execute.
Yeah.
So you got a reason to execute, then you got to like a little bit of how you're going to execute, and then I have to imagine the other one's like some space or capacity, right? So like,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
so
carving out the time. Yeah, so like now it's looking for on the calendar. It's like, okay, where are all my projects stacking up? Is there we just did an episode recently about creative marathons. Is there a marathon I can fit this into? Or is this something where I can distribute it? Can I distribute this into like a couple hours a week kind of thing? Um, I used to have. I wonder what your relationship is with that sense of whittling. We've talked about whittling a lot, but this is a good opportunity to remind ourselves of this, because uh, I know that my relationship with whittling has changed over the years. The tension has had an ebb and flow to it with how frustrated I get with the notion.
oh, I mean, so is in like is whittling. So the concept of whittling is that it's occurred to me in a few different ways. It's a smallness of being able to pick up and put effort toward a thing and see that effort have progress. But it's also there's a compatibility with whittling, because like not all projects are that easily sort of metaphorically pocketable and unpocketable. So if the idea of whittling, you just have a little piece of stick and a tiny blade, and you can chip away at something. And I've had like this Panda Needs You as that game project, that one got completed because I made it like whittling compatible with the whole ritual of like what I did when I opened it up, how I picked the task to do next, what I did when I was winding down the task, and then put it away to be whittleable again, right? So there's a few concepts in there, but like for what we mean when we've chatted about whittling in the past, and
Mm-hmm.
and you're saying it's how are you feeling about it?
Well, I mean, there are. It goes back to that emotional state that we were talking about when we realize we need to step back and like take a breath about it. Is that there are times where the whittling is very frustrating because it's like I look at the clock and I'm like, oh, I only get 45 minutes today to do this thing and to attend to this thing, and I really wish I had more time. And it feels like well, to use Mushin Girl's language, it's like you're not giving it the attention it deserves. And there's other times where I can remind myself that this is a cumulative effort and this adds up over time, and they're um, celebrating showing up and doing it today, right? Like the running app I use says sometimes like gives you little like affirmations, and it says like, hey, even if you only did a little bit today, that's better than nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it sounds like silly and like easy feel good advice, but that's true, right? Doing it a little bit is better than not showing up at all.
I mean, yeah, if you're engineering and designing the experience of working on the things that you work on, you will. I mean, you'll find you'll find a way that reinforces the behaviors you want to see happen. You can form habits and at least refine and adjust like how you go about this. And yeah, it's easy to, like, I mean, anything that can seem guru-ish. I know, like, you know, we're like having some words of authority,
have an allergy about that. Yeah.
hanging on a mirror or whatever. And you putting up a mantra or, motivational posters, whatever, right? But like, honestly, if any of those any of those trappings, any of those techniques, like whatever works as far as like feeling good versus feeling bad, like that's probably a signal to follow. That is like, why not, right?
I like that idea of what you said about making it whittling compatible. So that'd be a thing to investigate with a project too, I think. And a way that I manage that personally for my own work is that's one of the reasons I do so many darn mini comics. Because the mini comic becomes a way for me to investigate the idea in a whittle friendly way, where it's like, well, I know it takes me about 15 minutes to thumbnail a page on a Post-it note, maybe like somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes. That means I can do 8 of them in an hour to 2 hours, right? Somewhere in the neighborhood. So that, like, that I can make a pocket-sized investment in getting one discrete stage of the process put down, right? Which then gives me that feedback of, oh, I completed a stage of the process. I'm closer to getting it done. That helps keep me motivated, helps keep me showing up. So much of this is us tricking ourselves into coming back to do it again, right?
Yes. That's so yeah, making it sustainable. And obviously if it's difficult, if it's difficult emotionally or some aspect ergonomically, whatever, anything about your human experience that if you're noticing, you're noticing it, that like that's something to design and shape for yourself as well. Obviously that could be a path that is all about not what you're working on, clearly something to have a feedback loop on. And so one thing I wanted to mention is that, like these observations, you're sharing knowledge that you have a cost for tasks and that you're aware of, right? And that happened through, I would guess, some method of reflection, some method of planning, and maybe fueled by some kind of journaling. And I think so that there's a lot of benefit. We've endorsed it left and right on the podcast. Probably, I don't know. I don't think it can be. You can say it too much. That there's so many kinds of ways of unboxing your thoughts and using some kind of journaling method, whether it's totally unstructured and you're just making note of your day, or you're using the emergent task planner and tracking. This is an especially time-oriented perspective of my day and a few key tasks. Or if you're doing like a structured self-interview to say, like, you know what, I don't just want to look at my day. I want to take a wider perspective or hit a different angle. And one angle that I find really helpful is, let me look back at a year, 5 years, 10 years, and think about the things I've made and how I felt about them, right? And it's interesting. So like you can get, it helps me break a feedback loop of this harumphing concern of a negative, demon-like voice saying, you're not producing enough, quick enough, good enough, or whatever. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. It depends on which what I look at. Like, what have I produced? I don't know, for my side projects over a longer span of time. And let me take a look at that. And all of a sudden I get different stories I can tell from that are more informed by data, real observations. And I can say, well, you know what, given the time, I do put output in the world. I know I can do this, and I can, and it helps me tell a different story. So, and honestly, what you can shape a self-interview to dig into the truth of whatever story you're telling, and say like, well, am I, let's what's missing from the work I've done in the past, and but I want a clear perspective on it so it can help me with what I make capacity for to do next, that kind of thing, or just feeling better that, well, gosh, I've made hundreds of comics or whatever.
Right. It could be as simple as that. It could be something that, yes, where you just gain more insight as to what your capacities have been and how you can better leverage the capacities for future things. So
especially if you know the cost. So you go for the journaling is one aspect. If you just generate the data, you're not going to get as much benefit out of it. You want to do some kind of investigation into this. Now, okay, you've got the journal. What's inside there, and dig into it, and you can come up with things like, oh, it took me about 5 months to make 2 chapters of this comic. That's not a weird mystery. I know I could use that again, you have a foothold on trying to demystify the cost of moving forward on a thing. So, and then you can use that in planning. So hopefully you are being realistic.
Here's a very simple benefit that comes out of that, is that it becomes a lot easier for you to not overpromise yourself, right? I'm going to get 5 pages done this week. Well, I've got a record here showing that that's never happened. That it's that maximum I get 2, right? Like under these conditions.
Yeah.
And that's not to be nihilistic about it, but it's more like I have a lot of evidence here that shows that under the conditions that I've been operating under, this seems to be my best capacity. Therefore, I'll plan for 2, that kind of thing.
Which, I mean, it sounds straightforward, but I
does.
know, I mean, I still, no matter what I understand about my capacities, part of me who's like, well, gamble, go for it.
There's a John Mulaney bit, the stand-up comic, where he talks about people who make birthday signs or signed birthday cards, and he's like, start with a really big B or really big H, really big A, and you get to the end of it, and it's like you're running out of space. Now the letters get smaller and smaller and more crammed, and he's like, and then you don't learn from your mistakes, so you start the second line, or really big B. And I feel like that's Sunday when I'm having my self meeting is like, 7 days, I could do anything, And then you look at the hard facts of life, and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. All this stuff is going to have a time cost, so let's be a little bit more economical about it. Do you want to take a break and then get a little bit more upbeat about this discussion and celebrate some of the things about having too many projects?
Okay. Yes, I like this challenge. Let's try to celebrate this.
All right. In 1 minute and 30 seconds, we're going to celebrate some of the benefits that come out of having more projects than time. Believe it or not, I think there is a positive spin on this. But before we do that, we have to thank some people who make this show possible. And those people would be the people who support us on Patreon. Yes, patreon.com/leanintoart is the site. And what is it? It's a way for you to give us a monthly upvote, a way for you to say, hey, I believe in Rob and Jerzy and the work that they do. And I'll contribute $1 a month to this campaign to keep this show, make the show more sustainable. And I want to thank 5 people who have been doing exactly that. First up, Becca Hilburn. Becca Hilburn you can find on Twitter at NattoSoup. Thank you, Becca. Rachel Ross. Find Rachel on Twitter at NYCTERIS. So it's like New York City Terrace. Thank you, Rachel. And Shane W. Smith. You can find Shane on Twitter at Shane_W_Smith. And Merjam. Find Merjam on Twitter at MYRJAMVDV. Thank you, Merjam. All these will be linked in the show notes, by the way. And finally, Ashley Knapp, longtime friend of the show. Ashley can be found at ControlAltLea on Twitter. And if you want to join them, you can go to patreon.com/leanintoart, where you will find all the shows we make, as well as the extra leans, the shows we record only for patrons. And it says right here, there's 48 patron-only posts in there. 48 episodes that you'd be able to get right now by signing up for as little as $1 a month. And then those extra lean episodes become open mic posts where people can talk about whatever they want in a safe place where only fellow leaners hang out. Once again, that web address is patreon.com/leanintoart. Thank you to everybody who has been supporting us there. It means a lot to us.
Mm-hmm. Really does.
All right. How about some bridge music as we try to get more positive. Let's see if I got some positive music.
How does it get more positive than the Dragon Ball theme?
Oh, well, Rockets.
Fair enough.
It's pretty good.
It is good. I mean, space exploration.
Oh, and just the word "go" is such a great word. Like "Go Go Power Rangers," Teen Titans Go. Okay.
All right, and so it is. So somehow this having a lot of creative projects, and to the extent where you're feeling some kind, you have the potential to feel some kind of stress or tension about it. This is time to throw a party.
I'm overcommitted. I'm stressed out. All right. Well, that could call for some elements of partying. Yes.
Yeah.
But no, I just think that there's such a thing as having a good problem, right? Because like there is a romantic idea that some people like to talk about writer's block or being creatively stunted, not knowing what to do next and feeling very frustrated by the whole business. There have been books written about this. There have been fictional stories written about this. And I think that having too many interesting things to play with sometimes means that, like, wow, I have a pretty big bank of ideas to cherry pick from, right? And these ideas can inform one another very readily, right? I have buckets and buckets of notebooks that I've been writing stuff down in. And if I know that on projects that I have done in a freelance capacity, or projects that I take on, that are published, or in some way I'm committed to it, and I have like accountability. And if I get stuck on something, I know I have cannibalized other ideas that I've used in the past to help develop whatever needs my immediate attention.
That's a pretty cool side effect. I think of that as mining, like digging into the mountain of your past materials kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. And then I've also had situations where, like, I've got this project, I've got to explore this particular concept. Oh, I've explored something similar in this other half developed thing. So I've got some thinking done in that direction. I'm not coming to this thing fully innocent and blind. I've got some cycles burned on it, right? And maybe this other project's a very different thing, but I've already done some thinking in that direction, and that can help me find faster inroads with this new thing.
Wow. Yeah. So, God, there's another skill too. And it's like, well, the idea that you can get skillful about having a lot of projects, and then likely that means that not every one of your projects has a severe deadline, which is an interesting thing, because now you've got this little, like, potentially like a little, I don't know, like an activity engine of hobbies and potential future business things. Like you mentioned, it as good problems. You can think of it as experiments. That those experiments, inherently, the outputs, just them existing, it becomes resources to mine. But then and you're putting in effort, then there may be outcomes to mine as well. And I think well, let's see. It's like, but it is like, it's worth celebrating, but I do think it's like, celebrate safely. It's like, you use, be it, don't overdo your, don't create unrealistic expectations for yourselves and drive. Like, don't drink and drive kind of thing. Like, and there's some way to do this in a safe practice that doesn't put you in a situation where, and now you're going to have a likely less happy existence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because like as long as you get past that the warning label, as long as you get past the, like you find your own comfort and approach that um you can coexist with these different projects, and you have your expectations aren't a mismatch as far as what you can put out into the world, and you're being judicious about deadlines, using them as a tool but not overusing them.
Mm-hmm.
Using your goals as a tool but not flooding them with things that you don't really set up to succeed with yet.
Yeah.
And overcrowding, right? So you plan, if you, I don't know, if you shape it well, though, that's I agree with like having the assets to mine. That's been incredibly helpful. Having just because even if you're a person that's tending toward the multiple project thing, do you think that does that lend a person or make it more likely that you are wearing lots of hats, or all of those projects likely of a similar form?
I would say that maybe it's worth clarifying that we are both people who take on. Well, I think the nature of a personal project often demands that you are wearing a lot of hats because it's a personal project, and if you don't have the money or the resources to hire out, which is maybe we
Mm-hmm.
can tag that for a final thought, talking about that kind of idea, then you are going to be wearing a lot of hats. Like when I do a book with a publisher, certainly I'm offload certain elements like publicity is now not as much my concern. Designing the book is not my concern anymore. They have designers for that, right? Managing the timeline and the deadlines is not my concern as much, right? I have a partner in that. But when it's a personal project, certainly I'm going to be doing a lot more of those things in addition to the actual creative stuff. Um, is that what you're talking about?
I think so, and I think pulling on that thread further, this might be because of my interests. Like I have not for many years really had an active music project, right?
Okay.
But occasionally it comes up. I'll occasionally have an active game project, and in different levels of health, right? Um, and then or I may be designing something, and or I might be coding something, and so like different hats like that,
I
or
gotcha.
writing a workshop or whatever, and
Yeah.
I think that I don't know if that helps or hurts, honestly. Like like pursuing like pursuing projects that are like more different skill sets. Like you're describing many hats that
Yeah.
are like sort of I don't know. They're different skills, right? But
Yes, but they are all in the direction of making comic books in some way or another. But then there's
right,
other elements to it, like there's like the fact that I experiment with different printing technologies for my personal projects. So now there's going to be like there are elements to what I'm doing that are like very much more physical, like when I'm doing letterpress printing or screen printing, it
interesting.
has less
Yeah,
to do right with, and that's a time consuming thing that has a real cost, but it's a very different kind of skill that I'm using than when I'm writing or when I'm drawing.
yeah. And you have
Right?
skills that you bring with you to apply to this new thing, but inherently, I mean, you're learning like a new um, physical set of tasks,
Mm-hmm.
and a different medium and media, and that's, I guess, yeah, that's you're building a new capacity, and I don't know, like it's interesting to acknowledge that. So I suppose if you are really comfortable in accomplishing a certain kind of output, comics, or I mean anything. I mean, you have your wheelhouse, I guess, right? And then if you're extending your wheelhouse or building in, and I guess that extension could be something that's just a little bit different or very different. But I don't know if that seems to be another factor that can adjust a lot of things. Like you could be even gaining like more energy and excitement because what you're doing is totally different, right?
Yep.
Or
Yep.
like maybe like for me, like I sometimes I'll be working on projects that are different enough where they feel so different that I won't I'll be totally burned out on like coding, but then excited to draw something or plan a story or
One of
make a
my favorite
workshop.
one of my favorite things about this gig, this line of work, is that there are days where I feel like I just want to shut down, not talk to anybody, and get into like really like the super flow state and just like lose myself in something. Okay, today then I really should pencil something today. Today's a penciling day. I really want to listen to podcasts and see what's going on in the world while I also get work done. Well, today's an inking day, right? Um, I really want to, experience some novelty and get into beginner's mindset. Well, time for letterpress lab and time to do some more experimentation, right?
Mm.
Um, being able to, and this is where I guess go back to however we would phrase your don't drink and drive PSA warning, is that this is something I think that should be engaged with in a thoughtful way, where it's not like, well, I'm just going to whimsically flip between this and that. It's something where I'm like paying very close attention to what my emotional and physical state is. Like, where am I right now, both emotionally and like, how do I feel? Like, how does my body feel? And how does that groove with where we are in the deadline on whatever we're trying to ship, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah,
it's
I
not
mean
something like, yeah.
it's almost like when it's like the difference between pure research and applied research
Mm-hmm.
and versus something where or you're just executing on a product, right? So you could think of those at like three different levels of risk, right? So like when you're really executing, you're totally in your wheelhouse, you're set up to succeed, you know how to estimate that stuff, it's very familiar, and that's great. But then maybe there's things where it's like you're reaching out a little bit, it's applied research, you're integrating a little twist on your your current skills, so you're using you're using like visual design and composition and illustration to do letterpress or something, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then it's got this other different quirky production medium that you're like, well, okay, I'm learning that new thing, but it's not that alien in the big context of things.
Yep.
But
Yep.
then you could be like, and I'm also going to learn how to um, express myself in with on roller skates. I don't know.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Yeah. Like, or I'm gonna take a dance class, or I'm going
yep,
to, practice the accordion, anything. Um,
exactly. But that's more like pure research, where
mm-hmm.
like you're as long as it's again, I don't have a pithy saying that unifies all this, but like the like realistic expectations as far as what you're comfortable with, what you're stretching yourself, or what you're totally putting yourself in a situation where you really are going to be in a beginner's mindset. Um, can I don't know, that can be pretty darn energizing. That's like it's one of my favorite things. That's why like having different options to learn, and like that's the output, right? That I got to try a thing and experience that. Uh, where I wasn't attached to the output. But other than like I got to find out something I didn't know before. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mapping that out, yeah, that's
Yeah. Yeah. And I think those, if that's a good framework, is thinking about those three different modes: pure research, applied research, and then just shipping the thing.
hmm.
Um, So, and then there's another thing about dispersing yourself over multiple things, right? It's like there are times where I feel a little bit. How do I describe it? Is it regret? Is it regret that I'm feeling? So, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, a lot of the webcomics advice was find an IP that you can invest in, intellectual property, develop an idea, and commit to it for 5 years, 3 years, right? And make that your brand, make that your core identity. You got to have like a solid strip, solid comic strip that really like represents you, and you got to invest because it's going to take you 3 years to build an audience for this thing. And I've had many different projects that I thought were that thing, and I keep on discovering after a few years of investment into it, like, no, that's not my thing. I think my thing is something else. And I felt like a sense of regret that like I don't have that identifiable thing that if I put that character's face on a banner, people go like, oh, it's Jerzy, right? Which, you know, we could argue pro or con on that, but I think a pro in that situation is that because I'm dispersed, there's less chance of me, and I know I have in the past, I've been guilty of this in the past, is mixing up my whole identity with the work that I'm doing, right? My sense of who I am being dependent on the work that I'm doing. And I know I still do it to a large extent. I mean, I'm a cartoonist and teaching artist, right?
We just run into that wall when we start the podcast every time.
Yep. Run into that wall, yes. In an inflatable sumo suit, yes.
We're totally, we are more than those definitions, but
right.
it certainly is a service-minded, please understand some of my intentions through this title that I provide. And so we can exchange value and ideas. Anyway, so, but yeah, so you were saying about creating one identity, and that seems appealing.
It's a clear reminder that your creative identity has lots and lots of different voices in it. Right? You can be lots and lots of things, and you don't have to base your self-worth around any one of those things. Right? It's like distributing the risk of your portfolio, as it were, of your investment portfolio.
Yeah, very much that. And that risk can happen. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens as you go over time. And you can transition to new projects, or maybe you create more capacity to adopt another project in parallel. And then of course, and you're saying it's like, if you have those parallel projects, it's, or parallel or serial, it's your identity. It's like, it's not all in one, you're not betting on one thing. And that can be beneficial. And it's funny. I see it, I hear advice also, the opposite of that. I think it's very much like a cultural motivational thing of like, where do you feel comfortable and productive? Do you want to be at an institution or make an institution? And is that part of your, what you find it, desirable? Or are you great with things that are just, I guess, what's different, like projects instead of this. And I say institution because like, I mean, I like just to paint a contrasting picture of like durable, well-known and associated with you over long periods of time. And it seems like that is like synonymous with you, and it is your home and place of comfort. That's great. And honestly, I don't even think that's it's mutually exclusive. You could feel like this is the institutional thing and then change your mind at some point too. So I don't know.
And you can be part of multiple worlds that way too, right?
I remember that it was such a shocking thing growing up, seeing when someone in one band was in a different band also, or where it's like you realize it's that the, I guess, creative endeavors, business endeavors, and all that, they can be more flexible. Or you have some folks who, no, that's it. They made the one institution, and that is what they endeavor to nurture single-mindedly.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a temperament and disposition kind of thing too. And if we're speaking to the person who has more projects than time, I think it's a fairly safe guess that they are of the other disposition.
Probably.
Where,
yeah, I think in the odds, yes, pretty likely. What do you think?
Anything else in this section to touch on? I mean, I guess there was something that we had in our notes early on that we kind of moved past because we were, for the sake of time, and it didn't feel like it had a good place in the conversation where we were, but I feel like it has a good place here is, this idea of like being too, what was the word that Mushin Girl used? I don't want to say stubborn, but like being too adamant to like let anything go.
Yeah, we didn't address that much yet.
We didn't. And I know that at least something I've discovered in the years and years of doing lots of different kinds of projects is that there are things that I found that I was able to let go by virtue of the fact that I'm just a different person now. So I did a graphic novel in 2006 called The Front Rebirth, and it was a joyful investigation and exploration of everything I loved about the media that I grew up on, injected with what I think I had to say as a person at the age that I was. And looking back on it, I think it operates out of an assumption that I don't subscribe to anymore, which is that pretend violence is a fun and serviceable way to act out, different feelings and emotions, right? It was like I thought of violence as like the way that some people think of dance. It's just this expressive thing that is in a safe place because it's pretend. And as I get older, and there's a good amount of very joyful gun violence in that. There's a character who has a gun that it has a sentience, and it's like he treats it like it's his girlfriend, which also kind of problematic when I look back at it now. And like I don't know if I would do that nowadays, So it's like it's a project that I feel like I've grown past, and while I'm still proud of the work as it is, it's not anything that I feel that I have anything to say through anymore. As a matter of fact, it feels like in a lot of ways it's the wrong thing for me to say what I want to say. So there are projects that, given enough time, I feel like if you change as a person, it's no longer like that. I feel like I can put down with a clean heart.
And is that a willingness to let go based on a different? That sounds like a principle. It's like you've changed in some principle way that that means that that's not as good of a fit. Saying like, well, yeah, this is not as much me anymore.
It's not as much. I mean, and there's elements that are still very much me in it, but the core sort of engine of the story in that, like, this is a thing where there's like a lot of slapstick comedy and violence in it. I don't feel like that's something that I can engage with in the same way anymore. I love the characters still, right? But the project itself can't continue, at least not under my hand. But go ahead.
Well, you're reminded, like, I don't know if it's kind of a meta point or what have you. I guess there's a disclaimer. A meta point might happen, which who knows if that's useful, but it reminds me of like, if you look at your endeavors, if you think of yourself as a business or a machine or like an institution, even if it's like, I'm a creative entity that does these 20 things or these 1 things or whatever. And if what you're doing, it is not, if it's essentially, however you're tending to that, your creative career, right? As if it's punishing learning, like if there's learning that's happening and it's getting, muted and it's not being embraced, then that's the where I think at times I would avoid learning from past mistakes. but by continuing the same habits, I get the same outcomes over time. And if I'm willing to face it, then noting that uh, being willing to categorize my projects and say, like, some of them really are just experiments, and they're it may look, I could sit at the desk and be doing this project, and it looks almost the same as I'm in front of a computer, right? Like, how is this different than this other project? But like, my expectations are different, right? And so, like, being willing to say, yeah, that that's like a side thing, um, but I get joy out of poking at it once in a while, and instead of having a severity about it, right? And so that's helped me being more able to adapt and learn from if you have all these experiments going on, they're probably not all going to succeed. And so you're going to, if I'm tuning that out, if I'm not noticing, or yeah, if I'm tuning out like something that like 5 or 10 experiments already told me, right? Where like like one thing I think I over indexed on, it was like, oh, I want to be able to ship something. And I found out lots and lots of ways to ship stuff. And now it's like, I want to achieve other goals. But I kept doing projects that were related to, something comfortable. Anyway, and it's like, I needed to acknowledge that. Oh, okay, I figured this one out. Time to move on, I think, because there's other things I want to achieve, and just doing this ship stuff fast approach, it's not going to get me to where I want to go on these other projects. So yeah, that's a rambly end meta,
no,
maybe. But
I want to underline something you said there that I think is really great. If you have lots of experiments going, they're not all going to succeed. That's the whole nature of reframing it as an experiment, right? And I love thinking about my projects as experiments until they like you prove them enough times, right? My mini comics are a parade of experimentation, and because I use that word and I treat it that way, it changes my relationship with the work, and it allows me to let go of it for a time and see what signal it receives, and then upon receiving the signals, I can go, okay, well, now that's doing something. Now I have more data because I've let it exist in the outside world for a little while. Now I can look at it again and see if there's anything else to do with that. Maybe there's not, or maybe there is, right? I was just at a Comic-Con this past weekend with Dan Michigan, and I had my mini comics up on a stand, and people kept stopping when they saw the Captain Cat cover. Captain Cat, former shark hunter, a mini comic that I made 4 years ago with my wife Ann. And when Dan remarked to me, he's like, "Man, there's something about that name that just catches people's attention." I said, "Yeah. Whenever I go to shows, it's the book that I wind up selling the most of, and I still haven't figured out why. I'm guessing it's because it's got a cat in people clothes. Sharks are very popular. It says former shark hunter. You open that center spread, there's a shark leaping over a boat. Probably need to do something more with that, right?" So, but again, funny? Yeah, it's the funny little thing that we did on a lark, right?
Tuning in, like, so you could have that's a let's see. I know this is the happy time. This is the party section of the podcast where we're like, woohoo, lots of things. It gets a lot of benefits. And that whole, you may have lots of observations that you could be learning from, but you're too busy making the donuts and going about the projects to notice them. Yeah. And so I just pointing back to, like, you increase your chances of noticing these things by having some kind of feedback loop that you work. Maybe it's journaling, maybe it's doing weekly retrospective things, what have you. But yeah, that's funny. I mean, that you're putting a product in the world, and the world's giving you a signal.
Yeah, and Nate Marcel's in the chat asking, like, projects as experiments is great. When does it pass the experiment point? It's like when I start to get either out, like I said, I put it out in the world. I wait for outside signals. Ones that are very important to me are signals from sources that I have a lot of trust in. So people whose taste I have a lot of value in, or I place a lot of value in. People whose opinions I prize. If they give me a particularly unsolicited, very positive signal, then I take that as, okay, time to look at this again. Maybe talk with that person, ask them what they're responding to, and start driving in that direction, because that becomes, new data point. Well, I like it because of this. Okay, well, let's see what happens if I do more of that. And it goes into a second round of experimentation phase. So,
yeah. So that those experiments, just having these projects exist too, just having them on your radar, where let's say you have a fairly focused list. So, like a few of them are shipping, or maybe just one where you've got not too much pressure for these, especially if they're side projects, right? And not your day job. And that was that's also attention that a lot of us are working on these things. In addition to, this, having a different way that it's your primary way of engaging in trade, right? Anyway, but having that list, it's like it has this sort of, maybe it's because of availability heuristic or others cognitive biases and stuff like that, where you notice stuff related to the projects you want to get done, where it's almost like this little, you're going about your day to day, and stuff that you might not have noticed, it's shinier and more obvious. Where if you're like, yeah, I'm thinking about doing some voiceover on this comic, and that's that side project, whatever, right? And now things that appear in your feed or in your day-to-day conversations, it's like there's some kind of it's like a net that you're using, and it's filtering, and stuff gets caught in the net. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. Joseph Coco's in the chat and is responding to some of the things you've been saying. And Joseph says, it sounds like for Rob, sometimes the results of a project isn't what he's producing, but his experience of producing it.
Yeah. It's, that's very fair. Like, I want to be shaped. Like, part of like why I'll have the projects on my list that I'm like, yeah, this is, I'm getting more toward gambling and more wilder pure research, right? And I'm like, but I'm going to keep that on the list. It is definitely, it's about being influenced by these intentions.
I think if we've done anything with this discussion, I hope is that we've shown that there's more to it than just showing up, committing, and shipping. That there's a lot of levels to this thing, and that frustration that we can feel sometimes over not being able to attend to everything with the attention that the project necessarily deserves is one aspect of being engaged in creative endeavors.
Yeah, it's and yeah, and we hit that. There's a lot of facets. Like, and what is your relationship with the endeavors, with the feeling of, I can imagine some folks would have 100 things on their list and not necessarily have that be a concern. Just like, yeah, whatever. I'm just working on the top one, whatever. Yeah, and but yeah, I think we have provided some fun tools that, and I can tell because I took a ton of notes as we've been going, where, yeah, there's food for thought for like how do you shape and model this, because you're going to want to find a way to get good at it, and because as it stands, with just focusing on the output, right? Like you were saying, the shipping, I think there's a huge chance to miss things to learn, miss things that will, you don't want to be an insufferable artist to the people in your life, right? Where it's about being skillful about, like, yeah, I've got the side projects, and I can manage it in a way where it works for me and the people I'm in my life, and the other skills or the other things I'm committed to.
Yeah, I think that's great. Okay, well, how about we start thinking about final thought?
Mm-hmm.
I had an idea. There was there's a whole block that we kind of skimmed over, not skimmed over, we kind of like dodged around in an earlier conversation that I think is worth possibly going into his final thought. Like, are there examples where we threw out a step in order to make the work more efficient? Like when we think about triage, triage is this idea of like, well, look, I'm not gonna be able to do full surgery on this, so it's gonna be a patch job for now. Keep the thing alive. Are there situations where, you know, you found a shortcut in order to get the thing shipped in some form or another, get to the end of it? And were there any prices to pay in doing
that? Sure.
Yeah. Okay. You game?
I'm game. I like it.
Okay. So another minute and 30 seconds or so, we're going to take on the final thought. But before we do that, we got to thank some more people who make this show possible. Those people happen to be us. We make stuff, and we experience things. We are shaped by the things that we make. We bring those thoughts back into this show. And the thing that I hope you will check out that I made with my wife Ann is a comic called Science Comics Rockets. It's available in stores almost everywhere right now. And what is it? It's the history and science of rockets as told by the animals who participated in rocket history. So you learn how rockets work. You learn about the people who developed and made great strides in rocket science. And the narrators are all animals who were involved in the history that they're exploring. So, for instance, the first living creatures to orbit the moon were not the crew of Apollo 8 like we think. It was like we've been told. It's actually 2 Russian tortoises who were sent up in a mission called Zond 5. And the first living creatures to fly in an Earth-made flying contraption were a sheep and a duck and a rooster. And there was a reason why those French scientists sent those guys up. And you can read all about it in Science Comics Rockets. It's sciencecomicsrockets.com is where you can find more information about the book. There's even information about the book tour that Ann and I are doing for the launch of the book. Our next stop at the time of this recording is the Detroit Institute of Arts in Detroit, Michigan, where we're going to be doing a nonfiction comics workshop where we teach you how to make your own nonfiction mini comics. We're going to be at Terrificon in Connecticut, August 17th through 19th. September 9th, we're going to be at the Carytown Book Fest. And in October, we're going to be at the MICE, the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So go to sciencecomicsrockets.com for more information. That's where you also can find a link to an 8-page preview of the comic. Rob, you make a game.
Yeah, totally. I do. And I just want to say, like, it's been a few episodes since I've commented. Science Comics Rockets is so fun. And it's edutainment, right? You get to, the journey of the animals and their humor and jokes, and yet all the science. It's awesome. It's awesome for any age. And then especially so where getting the young ones in your life excited about both physics and space exploration. Get out of here. It's fantastic.
Oh, thanks. Yes,
well
we worked really hard to make it a really funny book too. That was high on my agenda. Was actually making so like you learn something, but you are not. It's not work getting through the book because you're watching all of these Muppet-like animals argue and bicker with one another. Right? Character voice is important to me. So, yeah,
it has a ton of like exciting action in it too. Like just the whole like the rooster whipping the mug across the bar, right?
Yeah,
that's anyway. And talking about again, physics and stuff. It's delightful. Highly recommend it. You can get a copy for all the young ones in your life.
That'd be nice.
So
speaking of young ones, another thing you get them is this cool video game.
Indeed. Yeah. So let's say the young ones in your life have access to like a little, a phone-sized device or a tablet, whatnot. I know a lot of folks will make use of the like fun educational experiences with a phone, like without the SIM card, and it becomes like an amazingly useful device still. Even though you're not able to make calls with it, but you can share interactive experiences like, for instance, This Panda Needs You, which that's a game about, shape and pattern matching and dealing with a little bit of physics to get blocks to stack up in correct patterns. And so, well, it's a series of these pattern matching block stacking puzzles, but the whole situation is that a little panda is the one who encounters these puzzles, and they're actually solved when you see them, until a cloud comes along, doing what a cloud does, spreading wind, knocks them all around, and now it's mixed up, and it's up to you to help this panda put things right. And as you're going along, you're making progress. The panda dances and celebrates you, and you go through this adventure with the panda over 50 different puzzles. You can learn more about it at this-panda.com, and it is available on lots of platforms such as iPhone, runs on your phone, runs on your tablets, and also Android phones and tablets, and also Mac and Windows desktop. So check out itch.io for your desktop versions, or your favorite mobile store such as iTunes or Google Play. Search for This Panda. Need to.
If you do purchase it, a great thing you could do, that if you haven't done it already, give it a 5-star review on whatever platform you purchased it. That helps more people find it as well. And if you're here because you like the way we think about stuff rather than the way that we make stuff, that's fair enough. This show is a product that we make, and there's more products like it at lean2art.com/workshops, where you will find self-contained videos based on workshops that we've led in live classrooms. You can download them at a price of your choosing, even free. But if you do get value out of it, a great thing you could do is then go back and purchase it for a friend. That helps your friend. It also helps us. If you're watching this video on YouTube right now, a great thing you could do is give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. And if you're listening to it in a podcatcher like iTunes or Apple Podcasts, giving the show a 5-star review wherever you found it helps more people find it as well. And we thank everybody who has been doing those things. Nate Marcel says that a 4-year-old in his life really likes this panda.
Awesome. Thanks, Nate.
So, okay. Time for final thought. Had time to think about it. Are there any examples where you threw out a step in order to make the work more efficient, Rob?
What is the definition of steps that are not optional? Like where is that? Like where are steps that you're aware of always mandatory for all projects?
Well, that's a good question. You have been very good at reminding me in the past about minimum viable product. And do you remember, this was several episodes back, I was showing a Boulder Fleet cover I was working on where I was really trying to merge the technology of screen printing with letterpress. And it was a very difficult and very very costly in terms of time endeavor, because it turns out that doing registration on a letterpress without registration pins, I didn't have the foresight to work with larger paper through which I could put punch holes to do registration pins. So I was hand lining them up. Fairly easy to do on screen printing, very difficult to do on a letterpress. And Rob, you regarded the screen printed version of the cover without the final application of the letterpress plate, and you said, that looks like minimum viable product to me. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's only 2 colors without any lines. And I looked at it again. I was like, oh my God, it's like an abstract version of the cover, right? So what I thought was a mandatory step wasn't mandatory at all, thanks to your, very keen. You were looking at it with not in the weeds with me. You were standing outside of it, and you could see it for what it was, right? So probably any step is a candidate for being taken out. A candidate. I'm not gonna commit and say that any step can be thrown out, but
I mean, aren't you going through a matchmaking process, like looking for fitness and appropriateness based on the outcome you're trying to achieve, and then the method with which you can use to get there based on your resources, both your skills, your capacities, skills and time and attention. So that's so there's in that process, if you're looking, so are you dedicated to what I'm trying to accomplish as a goal, and some principles and aspects I have for evaluating that and knowing that I'm on target or not on target, right? For meeting this commitment. Or is it something else? I mean, is meeting the commitment really, you know, strong dedication to a certain series of process and steps and what have you, and then like, well, what's cheating? So that's so, and I'm answering this with questions because I don't know another way to address it, because in a way, I think, aren't shortcuts adaptations based on constraints? And it's like, are those constraints and adaptations fitting with your goals and principles or not? You know, so then it's about fitting and the matchmaking and navigating that. And then have I done this on projects? Only every project I've ever done. So how about the Lean into Artcast, for instance, right? Like what has shaped, acknowledging your constraints and to purposefully be shaped by them and still try to navigate that effect and the goals you have. Like how much are you going to, embrace something that could feel like a shortcut, where now that really, like, for instance, we don't edit this show. It's one, like that's part of it. Like we made one performance and one take. Then there's what else?
Well, the fact that we've got it rigged up so that we can just pull up images and music as needed, so that it can be that, like, if any editing happens, it happens in terms of cutting something off at the beginning and the end, right?
True. Yeah.
So it's yes, the tools we use are informed by the fact that we try to make this as chronologically economical as possible.
Right? That's a nice phrase.
Because we know that we have, we're at capacity most of the time on a lot of things.
Yet still, how could we have these interesting conversations and get this out on a consistent basis and all that? And also have some kind of, so we've chosen tools that help align with our goals, and we've chosen like a production method that fits that. I mean, you look at different kinds of podcasts and how they're produced. I mean, so our list is different than like a I don't know, than like a NPR podcast for sure.
Right, like any of those true crime ones.
Like we are the producers, we're the performers, and all that. Yeah, I mean, so like, I don't know if there's any other constraints with this project, but what about you, Jerzy? What do you think of as far as the shortcuts and
that evaluation happens on virtually every project that I do, is like, what's the most efficient way I can make this happen? And those efficiencies can be based on very different things. Like, is this a project that I'm going to be committed to for a long time? Is it something I'm going to do for a brief period of time? So, like, I did a mini comic with Zach Giolongo called Dino Sword, and Zach really wanted me to ink on paper. We did samples, we did experiments together on like different production approaches, and I knew that doing the work on paper was going to make it more labor intensive, in that I was going to have to scan pages and put them back together, and I wouldn't be able to flat them as quickly and as easily as I would if I was drawing it digitally, right? But it was a 16-page story that we were doing over a short period of time. Okay, it's a less efficient way of doing the work, but it's contained over a smaller period of time. It's not a long-term commitment yet. Here, if a publisher picks it up, then we'll have to talk about this, because that'll be like an 8 to 12 month commitment, right? But then we did negotiations where it's like we originally wanted to do it in color in time for A2CAF, and I said, Zach, because we're doing it this way, I don't think I have the capacity to do that. What if we just did like what would you call it, like ink washes for tones on it for this first round? We can look at coloring it later, right? So that negotiation happened. Whereas with the project I'm doing with Dan Michigan, this is going to be a weekly webcomic. And so I better find ways to make this have as little impact on my week as possible, right? And that's not because I don't want to give it the attention it deserves. I want to give it the maximum of attention it deserves, while also making sure that it doesn't overtake my life.
That's it's project management. You're acknowledging you have a fixed date, and let's see, and you're trying to adjust like the effort it takes to accomplish it. Because it also is, your capacity is very constrained. So did it feel like cheating? I mean, how'd that go?
Yeah, I don't. I'm not a believer in cheating. If we're going to use that word, I don't like using it in a negative way, because I think of, there's a great book that everybody who's interested in comics should read, I personally think, called Kirby, King of Comics, and it's by Mark Evanier, and it's a biography of Jack Kirby. And at one point in the book, it talks about this panel, like Kirby was known for drawing 5 pages a day, right? Which is just like an insurmountable number, right? On a really good day, I think I've penciled 3 pages, but they were very low detail pages, right? But one of the ways he was able to achieve this, besides being like an actual genius, was there were panels where like the description ran something like the plane tumbled toward the ground, engines on fire, everybody on board was screaming for their lives, and the panel he draws is a little silhouette of a plane with smoke coming out of it and a big scream word balloon going across the background, right? It's like, okay, well, cheat, is it? Or is it, did it delivered on what it asked for, right? It's just another way of looking at it in a way to efficiently get the work done, right? And I think about things that other comics creators have said, like, you get one panel to really show off. The rest of them need to be like journeyman panels, just get the job done. Right, so one panel per page to be a big show off, and the rest of it is just get the story told. And I think we can conflate efficiency with cheating, I think, unnecessarily. It's like another quote I could trot out is something that Dan Mishkin likes to quote all the time. It was attributed to Chuck Jones about the Roger Rabbit movie. He said, like, art should be 99% effort and, or like 90% effort, 10% love, but in the end, only the love should show, So are you, a question I ask myself is, am I showing off, right? Am I trying to show how effortful the work is? And that's another, like, warning sign that I use to keep myself from ignoring efficiency.
How funny. And that's a huge thing, right? I don't know, that kind of self-knowledge to know, like, I mean, I'm guessing the, am I showing off? That sounds like some kind of measure you use, some kind of, heuristic to check in, self-interview, that kind of thing. Because do you kind of want
to? Yeah, of course I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we share this stuff partially because we want positive feedback and we want to be acknowledged for what we consider to be valuable about ourselves.
So that's right. That's very pragmatic, though, to say, like, well, okay, how has someone else succeeded in managing that? Where it's like, I want to put 100% in all the time. How beautiful. Also, how expensive, how just, yeah. I mean, that you've really, yeah. I mean, you've basically made a project, if that's going to be the definition of part of how it's executed, super expensive. And is that a fit? Well, okay, then you have a way to deal with that. And I think we all end up adopting that stuff, where you'll fill your own toolbox with these kind of heuristics for how are you managing and navigating your current queue of work, whether it's one project or multiple.
Oh, Rob, I think we got to do a part 2 of this someday, because there's a lot more places we could go, and we're already at like an hour and 45 minutes.
Yep.
I think we did I wanted to say I think we did a podcast, but I don't think we did. I think we did part of a podcast with this one. This is a big one.
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say we did a podcast. There's always more. There's always more. There's like, that's the thing. I have become comfortable coexisting with. I have a desire to do way more things than I'm currently doing, and that's all right. I have a desire to go way deeper into this topic, and I know we will. But I think we did it.
We did enough for this week.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we record the show usually every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central, and we stream it live on YouTube and then collect it as a podcast at patreon.com/leanintoart. And we will be back again with another episode soon. Thanks to everybody who hung out in the chat with us today. And thanks to everybody for downloading, watching, and listening. Until next time, I have been Jerzy Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jerzy Drozd on Instagram.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Instagram.
Okay, bye. How about I put up the title card?
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
All right, I'm going to shut off the live stream. Thanks for everybody for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thank you for hanging out. Good night.